everybody, Caleb here, and today I've got this Taylor. Now, this is a 2003 Taylor 314. It's a very nice guitar. It's got a couple of issues that we're going to try and sort out today. Mainly, the action is crazy high. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's not real playable the way it is. We're going to have to take that down. Beyond that, the center seam is kind of coming loose, and then there's a crack right along here that we're going to address. One or two more things than that, but we'll get to that as we go along. I think the first thing I'm going to do is get this set down, and we'll start really looking at the specifics on this and then start tearing it apart. So here we go. So I guess the first thing we'll do here is kind of check the height on the strings, because that's probably the most important thing that's going on here. So I'll stick my gauge in here. It's above 150 thousandths on that bass side. That's pretty crazy high. It's just about the same on the treble side. It's pretty crazy, ridiculous high. Now, if this were any other guitar, I would have a serious problem here. But I'm fairly certain this Taylor has a bolt-on neck. There's an adjustable screw on the inside, so I can actually work this neck up, because I'm fairly certain the neck angle is the problem here. I can take out a straight edge and run it along the fretboard, and it runs into the bridge. When it's run along the fretboard, it really should float just less than 1/8 of an inch off that bridge. But when it runs into it, that really tells me that neck angle is not real right. So I know the bridge isn't too tall. I've measured it. It measures about 280 thousandths of an inch, and less than 300, and you're actually sitting about the right height. So the bridge is the right height, but my strings are crazy high. My neck angle is the problem. To actually get at the adjustment, I'm going to have to take the strings all the way off of here and get inside the hole. So I think that's what I'm going to do next, is go ahead and start some disassembly. These strings are very crusty, old, very dull sounding. I'm going to go ahead and cut them. I'll replace them. The other thing I learned while I was loosening these up was the tuners are kind of hard to turn. So that's something I'm going to have to look at as well. You've probably noticed that I have the one bridge pin in here that doesn't match. I have actually already found one in my spares that matches pretty perfectly. I'll show it to you here. So this is the original, and this is the one I found to match. And it's not perfect, but I think once it's in there and lined up and all the strings, I don't think anybody will ever notice that they're not the same. And that'll actually get all the bridge pins matching again. Come on. We'll get rid of those. So now that I've got the strings off of here, I could work on the neck or I could work on the cracks, and I think I'm going to work on the cracks first, not for any particular reason, but I think I'm just going to get them out of the way, then I'll work on the neck. After that, there's two that I see that I need to probably do something with. One of them is here. I don't know how well you can see it. I can't see it very well on the camera, but it stretches from about here to here. And it actually seems fairly tight. So there's no way I'm getting any wood glue in there. What I'm gonna do is try to CA glue it, and that's kind of a dangerous activity. You can really screw up the finish with CA glue. So that's why I'm putting this tape down on each side of the crack so that I can run the CA glue down and I'm not too worried about it going everywhere. It'll hopefully get just in the crack. So I'll put this tape down as tight as I can get it on each side of the crack and still have that whole crack open, which is about like that. And then I'll take some CA glue and just run it down there and wipe off any excess. So I've got a little dropper filled with CA glue. I'm just going to run a really small bead up that gap. I'm fairly certain that'll do it. I'm going to take a cloth and wipe off any excess while it's still liquid. That will probably be fine for that crack. Now, if it were open or there were a little more pressure on it, I might think about cleaning it from the inside, but I really don't want to put, any unnecessary cleats on the soundboard. And because it really wasn't open by any means, it was a really tight crack, I'm not worried about it. I think that's going to do fine. That'll stop it from progressing anymore, and it'll let me get this finish cleaned up pretty good, I think. Now we're going to look at the center seam, and I think we're going to end up doing the same thing there. I'm going to go ahead and pull this tape off. I don't really want to leave the tape on the finish any longer than I have to. I say that's the center seam, but I actually think it's not. I do think it's a separate crack, because it doesn't go exactly straight, which means it's probably running along a grain line. Similarly, there's no way I'm getting any wood glue in there. It is way, way too tight. But I'll just do the same thing I did. That thin CA glue will go into any gap, really. You really find this out when you got a place you don't want it to go. That's exactly where it'll go. So if there's any open crack here, it'll work its way in. And we'll wipe that off, just any excess. And I think we're done there. Same thing, it's not an open crack. There's not a lot of pressure pulling on it. Even when the strings were up to full tension, I didn't notice it was open, so I'm not going to worry about cleating it. That I think would just be unnecessary muffling on the soundboard. So this leaves a little bit of a lip. You can probably hear me run across it. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of touch-ups to get that taken down. But this whole top needs shined up. So I'm not too worried about maybe taking some really fine sandpaper to smooth that out and then just buff this whole thing back out. The whole thing could definitely use it. So that's probably what we'll end up doing. I'm going to give this CA glue just a little bit of time. When you don't want it to set up quick, it sets up hard as fast as it could. But now that I want it to, I know that it's going to be soft. So I'll let it sit for a little while till I know it's good and ready, and then we'll work on getting that cleaned up the rest of the way. So I'm going to start by scraping this with a razor blade. I've got some tape on it, so I just have a little piece of the blade that's open. That tape also adds some thickness to the bottom, so it keeps me a little higher than the rest of the finish. So long as I don't push down too hard, I won't really have any issue. I'm just trying to scrape off that top edge of that glue I put in there. That's doing pretty good. We'll do this one as well. because of that extra thickness, I can actually feel where I've scraped and where I haven't. You know, I can feel the resistance, and it goes away as I get closer to the finish. Now, I can see on camera that's actually looking probably worse than it was when I got started. Feel-wise, it's actually a lot better. There's not as much of a crack there. They're definitely filled a little better. So I'm doing better in that regard, and also I know those cracks are filled and stabilized. I think it's just going to take maybe a little bit of tiny amount of sanding and then some good polishing, and we'll be doing good with those. So I've got a piece of wet 1200 now. It's wet 1200 sandpaper. I'm going to real lightly do those cracks. This is just to smooth that out and make sure you can't really feel it. I may have to go back to 600 and then do 1200 again, but I thought I'd start with the least abrasive thing I thought I could get away with. It's feeling pretty good. I think maybe just a touch more. The thing to remember about this is that CA glue is going to be harder than the finish. So you really got to be careful with this because you can sand way more finish off than you want really easily. Well, that's almost perfect. You really almost can't feel that. I know you can probably see it pretty well right now because I've dulled that finish, but once we get this whole thing buffed back out, I think that's going to be really good. So I've got these cracks looking pretty good. Really, they don't look very good, but I'm going to polish this all up when I'm a little closer to setting it up finally. What I started working on was the neck, and I'm going to have to pretty much unbolt it. But there was a sticker on the inside of the block. I don't know how well I can show back where it was, but I've gotten it off. I just took the heat gun and very lightly heated that sticker up. I'm going to try to actually reuse this. So I'm going to heat the sticker up a little bit and then flatten it out so it has some time to hopefully stay flat. So I'll set this aside. We'll try to put that back in there. But now that gives me access to that bolt for the neck. I do not know how well you can see that in there. I believe you can see that bolt there. There's that bolt right there, and there's also one on the underside of the fretboard. So on top of the fretboard where it joins, there's a attach point there. So I'll have to loosen both of them up to get this neck to come out. I'm not real sure how difficult this is going to be, but I'm going to start by loosening those both a little bit, see what adjustment I can get, and then we'll go from there. So I've started trying to get the neck off of here all the way, and there is a screw with a hex head on the underside that holds the extension down, and it is a 3/16 hex head, and of course the only one I have is this one. I've got a big set of Allen keys here and a little set, and they're both metric and nothing fits. Nothing that I have fits. So I loosen that up so I can do it with my hand, and then there's also the two bolts that are in actually the neck. There's one kind of at the top and one kind of down towards the bottom, and I've got to loosen those up as well. The top one's a little hard to reach with the stuff from the extension in the way, so I went ahead and took that out, and then we'll get to that top one. Just trying to use the wrench to break it loose so I can do it by hand. It's going to be a lot easier for me to do it that way. That's the bottom bolt. And with that top bolt, that neck should come very loose. So now that we got that opened up, I think you can see, I'll set that neck aside. There's a shim here for the extension, which is a little stuck, and a shim here for the neck. So this is how you adjust the neck angle on these. And I'm going to need a bigger shim than what's in here, basically. I say bigger, it's going to need to be thicker at this end than it is already, which will mean this top shim will need to be bigger to fill in that space. That way I can add more neck angle. I'm going to get some measurements on here, figure out exactly how big these things are, and go from there. This is where it would be really nice to have a laser cutter, and you can tell that's how these were cut because they've got the burnt edges. But I can probably use these as templates for shape. I just know that I need to add more angle to it. So I'm going to get some measurements, maybe start work on drawing some of these things up. I'll bring you back once I've decided where I'm going to go from here. So there's been a gap in recording on this. It's been a couple of days and I haven't really worked on it, but I have still been thinking about it. And what I was thinking was, initially I was going to make an all-new shim that would put us to the right angle, but as I started thinking about it, I don't really need to make a new one. I can modify the one that's in there, and that will save me, and therefore the customer, a lot of time and money. Because I don't need to add any material, just like a normal neck reset, I just need to remove in the right areas. So, just like a normal neck reset, I really don't want this top edge to move, because that'll move that top that fret that sits right above that. I just want to take some off of the bottom, so I've started doing that. I've done that in a combination of ways. Mostly, for the bulk of it, I used the finger plane to take off the edge here. And then I've started working this down with sandpaper to make sure that it's totally flat. You might be able to see I've marked with pencil on there across the whole thing. There's still some across this bottom edge and there's quite a bit across the top. I've tried to just barely been sneaking up towards that top. And I'm doing most of this with sandpaper at this point. You can see I've got a piece of stainless steel. It stays pretty flat. I don't see it cupping very much with me not pressing too hard. And I'm just working this totally flat. I do work the top edge on the sandpaper, but I really don't want to take anything off of that totally top edge. So I work, kind of around it. Most of the time it kind of hangs off and then I come up to it. I can also do this like this. And that's working this into a wedge shape where this will be thinner than it was and this will be the same. That way I will have more neck angle where I want it to be. I did kind of adjust this by eye. This may not be enough neck angle. I may have to come back here and take this a little thinner and wedge it up again. But I can do that. That's not that big of a deal. I just thought I'd catch you up as to where I was. This really shouldn't take me too long. And what I can do once I've got this where I'm happy with it is I'll stick it back in the guitar, put the neck back on it, and start looking at where that neck angle looks. So, I think I'll bring you back once we're ready to put the neck back in this thing. So, I've got this totally flat now. I'm really happy with the way it's looking, so I'll slide that back in there. Now that I've taken some angle off of this, or added some angle to it, that's going to raise this extension up, and the old shim won't be enough to do it properly. I'll end up bending that down too much, so I needed to make a new shim for in here that's slightly bigger, so I've actually gone ahead and done that. So we've got a new shim for in here. It is taller than the old one. It's not a lot taller than the old one. The old one was about 60 thousandths of an inch thick. This one sits a little closer to 90 thousandths of an inch thick, which should help bring that that extension back up to about where it should be. It probably will have a slope downwards on the extension still, but that's not super uncommon for acoustic guitars, especially ones without the cutout, because playing up here is kind of hard anyway. So I'll go ahead and stick that in there so we can get a really good idea where this neck angle is at now. We'll start to bolt this thing back on here now. So put the bolts back in there. I'm just going to get them started with my fingers. They're kind of hard to reach. And I've got the socket and the extension, so I can do them a little easier, at least finger tight. So I just finished tightening up them bolts. So this neck is reattached, so we can test the neck angle now. I'll pull the straight edge out and we'll run that along here. And actually that's looking really good. I'll zoom in so we can see a little better. Now this floats right above that, and it's about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little less than that, which is just about perfect. Wow, where it should be right now. What I may need to end up doing is actually making a taller saddle. I wouldn't be all too surprised if the old saddle was adjusted for the worse neck angle. There's a few things we can do before we get to that point, because actually, as it is right now, I am out of saddle blanks. So, while I'm waiting for those to come in, there's 1 or 2 more things I need to do to get this thing in good order. So, we will get started on those. So I'm going to go ahead and put this Taylor sticker back in now. This goes on the neck block and covers up the bolts. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to show me maneuvering it in there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of this Titebond hide glue on there. I know this comes off with heat fairly easily, so if someone has to take it off again, that shouldn't be super difficult. It takes a little while to set as well, which is good, so I can maneuver it once it's in the hole. It's kind of hard to see what I'm doing over here, but I'm going to kind of spread this out. Set that aside. I don't know if you're going to be able to see me try to get this in the hole, but I'll start at the bottom of the block and work my way up. That's how it was before, so I definitely can't show this while I'm doing it. It's in there. Now I'm going to try to maneuver it around with my paintbrush. Actually, that's looking really good. Press it up into the top. And I don't know if you're going to know that I was ever in there. I don't know if you can see it. Just like that, that sticker's back in there. Make sure the corners are pressed down. That's looking really good. So that's back in there. I did go ahead and polish the frets. I didn't do any leveling. They were fine. They were just a little cruddy. So I've polished those up. So they're doing really good now. I still need to polish the body. And I think I want to clean the fingerboard. It's got some gunk on it. So I'll probably get a razor blade out to do that. And then we'll oil that again. And it should be in really good shape. So I'm just cleaning this fingerboard up with a razor blade first. It's got a little bit of junk on it. And so if I just take a real sharp razor blade and work my way down the board, it takes off any of that grime. It also kind of shines up the inlay as you take just a little bit off the top. I have to work across the fingerboard because it's got a radius to it. So if I just sit here and do this until I get the whole thing, I will have worked it flat. And as per usual, whenever I get to the neck rest, it's always in the way. So then we'll come back up to the top where I started, and I'll start using the Be Good wood oil as a conditioner. And I'll just start working that in with my fingers. This is food grade, so I don't worry about getting it on my fingers or anything. It works really good. I really like it. And once I'm done with that, I will start working the excess off with a towel. And just like that, that fingerboard's looking basically brand new. So the last thing I've got to do before I get a new saddle in this, and since we're already waiting for a saddle for this, is I'm going to put a pickup in here. I was asked to put a pickup in here. I've gone ahead and ordered this one. This was in the price range that we wanted to spend. So I figured this was easily removable, so you could change this back to stock. And I don't know, it had good reviews, so that's the one we went with. The end pin on here has already been removed, and it was already a big hole, which is convenient because this is a end pin jack. I think I like those better in general because should you ever want to take it out and replace it, you can easily put a dowel in and put a regular end pin in or whatever it is you want, rather than drilling an extra hole in the sides of the guitar. I don't know if this is going to fit through the hole that's already there. I will check that first. And very conveniently, it does. So that's really good. Now all I've got to really do here is attach these 3 pickups to the underside of the bridge plate. I'm going to pull out all of the instructions and everything, and I'll get ready to do that. And then I'll bring you back and show you a little bit of how I do that. It's going to be kind of hard to show because it's on the inside of the guitar, but I'll figure something out. So I think I'm ready to start installing this pickup. What I'm going to do first is go ahead and put the jack in so that it's all kind of sitting about the way it needs to. And to do that, I'm going to take this 1/4-inch dowel and run it through the hole. I didn't have to drill this hole out. It was actually already big enough for the jack. It just had a end pin in it that filled the hole. So I've got everything on this side already, and as I run that 1/4-inch dowel through, I just put it in like you would your actual audio jack. Then as I pull that back through, that'll pull it right into the hole, and I don't have to fuss with it. So I don't think you can see that jack sticking out of there, but I'm going to put the washer on it now and the nut just loosely around the end so it doesn't fall back through. It's not totally snug yet in case I need to take it apart. It's a little easier. That'll prevent it from falling out. So now I'm going to work on the pickup part. I think they're calling them transducers. There's 3 of them, and they go pretty much evenly spaced in between the strings underneath the saddle on the bridge plate. The instructions recommend using super glue, but send it with some adhesive. From what I found, the adhesive doesn't really work, so I'm going to end up using super glue, which is why I'm putting a glove on, so I don't stick my hand to anything once it's inside the guitar. This is going to be kind of hard to show, and because I'm working with super glue, I don't really want to stick a camera inside because I might end up dripping some. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these things out. I'll put a dab of super glue on the spot, stick it back in there and place it, and then do that 2 more times. There's not going to be a real good way for me to show everything that's going on here, but that's how I'm going to do it. So I'll get that done and then we can move on. So in between clips here, I've gone ahead and actually taken this to the buffer. I'm not totally done with it yet. I think we're going to wax it once I get the new saddle ready. And I sat around for, a day and a half waiting for saddles to come, and finally it came. So now I've got some saddles. Actually, I want that one. We'll open that up. Get us a new blank out. And start working on that. Now, thickness-wise and radius-wise, I'm fairly certain this old saddle is going to be just about perfect. It fit in there real snug before, so it's not bad about that. There's no wiggle there, but that high E-string is going to be way too short. I can tell just by looking at it. So I can get a couple of measurements off of this, mainly being, the length of it, the radius on it, and how thick it is. And then we can go from there with our new one and just add some height to it. We won't have added any shims, and it should be very good. So I'll kind of draw that on there with a pencil. That'll help me get an idea about it, where everything needs to be. And then I can start working on shaping this to match this. So I got the new saddle made. I started some compensation on the B string, and I'm sure it's still too tall, but the only way to tell exactly how too tall it is to string it up. So I'm starting to string it up now. I did put a bevel on the end of the pins so that it helps hold the ball end where it needs to go. That way it doesn't get caught up on the pin. So we're up close enough to pitch for me to get a good measurement on here. And I'm going to go ahead and get that now. We'll see where we're at. I do know that it is pretty high. It's basically 150 thousandths. To about the same. Which means I need to take something like 100 thousandths off of that saddle. That's quite a bit, but that saddle is sitting pretty high. What I'm aiming for is about 80 thousandths of an inch on the treble side and 90 thousandths of an inch on the bass side. So what I really need to take off is about 60 and 70 thousandths of an inch, and then double that at the saddle. So about 120 and 140 thousandths. I don't really think that's going to be an issue. That is quite a bit, but that saddle is sitting pretty high. So I'll go ahead and loosen these strings up, take a look at doing that, and then we'll come back to this and make sure that's right where we want it to be. So I've got my calipers out, and I've got it set to 120 thousandths. That's for the bass side. I'll scratch through that. When I say scratch through that, I mean scratch through that Sharpie I put on there. That helps me keep track of that. And then I'll move this to what I want on the treble side. 140. Flip that around. We'll mark the treble side. And that ought to be good. Now, obviously, I've only marked the ends, but that will adjust the whole thing. And since I've matched the radius that's on the old saddle, which is the radius that came stock, it should keep everything in the middle well in line. You know, if this had individual saddles, then I'd have to worry about saddle height at all of them, but because I've matched the radius, I should keep all of the strings in the center well adjusted from just the outside points. So I'll go knock this off and we'll come back here. I'll probably knock this off and string it back up, and then we'll see where we're at. I was going to go ahead and restring this since I've got that saddle knocked down, but I thought I'd be much happier if I did this ahead of time. So I'm going to go ahead and wax this with this Renaissance wax. It works very good for that final touch. You don't want to do too much at a time, because the longer it sits, the harder it is to get off. So I just wipe on a small little area and take a clean cloth and buff it back out. That Renaissance wax is really good stuff. It's a paste wax, and it tends to make the surface a little harder. And you want to keep a clean part of the cloth for buffing. Otherwise, you're just going to keep smearing it around and never really get it off. After buffing those cracks out, and really the whole top, this thing is way, way better than it was. You can definitely still see where the cracks are. I won't say that they're invisible, but they are 100% stabilized. They won't get any worse. And feel-wise, they're almost invisible that way. And what's a guitar without a little bit of battle damage? Especially an almost 20-year-old guitar. I'm fairly certain that the top is the only part of this guitar that is high gloss. Everything else has kind of a, like it was matte and it's been worn a little bit to have a sheen to it. So I'm not going to worry about waxing any other parts. I think the top is the real part you see. It's the part you want to see shining. And I think we have accomplished that in spades. Now I'll get this thing strung up and tuned up, and we'll see what she looks like. So I've got this tuned back up to pitch now, or close enough to get a good measurement. It's probably not perfectly in tune. I probably wouldn't play it like this, but it's close enough for me to get a good measurement off of it. So we'll go ahead and do that now. This should be looking really good. That bass side is like exactly 90 thousandths of an inch, which is really good. We're sitting about 85 thousandths of an inch on that treble side, which may be a hair higher than I was aiming for, but I think that'll be fine. You know, that's kind of a personal preference thing, and 5 thousandths is barely anything at all. So rather than spend more time taking this apart, I'll leave it as it is, and if we have an issue down the road, then I'll take care of it. But for right now, I think this thing is good. You know, I've done a lot of work to this thing, and really it is way, way better than it was. We're doing better on the saddle than we were. We actually have more saddle left than when we started, because I've replaced it. It's taller than the old one was, and the action is way lower. It was like 150 thousandths of an inch on both sides. So we're 60 thousandths of an inch lower with a taller saddle. This has undoubtedly been a huge improvement to this guitar. playability-wise. We've also definitely stabilized those cracks. Now that they're filled with some glue, they won't be getting any worse. We've shined this thing up pretty good as well. I think the only thing that I really need left to do now is play it. There were a couple of things I did off camera while I was waiting for saddles to come in. I kind of dusted off the headstock and oiled all the tuners, which I had to take those all apart. I didn't show any of that, but that did get done because I had mentioned it earlier that they were a little stiff. They're definitely better now. So I guess I'll go get set up and we'll play this thing and then it can go on its way. Well, I've got this thing ready to go. You can probably see I'm plugged in and I've got the microphone. I think I've been enjoying the kind of the mix of the both, so I can get it sounding pretty much as good as it'll sound. And it sounds really good and it plays great. You know, this is finally playing like an American-made Taylor should play. I'm really impressed with it. So I think I'll play just a little bit to let you really hear what she sounds like. And then we'll wrap this thing up. I'm really enjoying this thing. I imagine the person who owns it will enjoy it just as much. The pickup turned out really good, I think. I think it sounds really good, very natural, which is good for an acoustic. I think that's really the goal of an acoustic pickup, is to make it sound like an acoustic guitar, but through a plugged in. So I'm really happy with that. Action-wise, this is night and day difference. And I do actually like the pin that we replaced. From this distance, you know, if anybody was looking at me playing that, I don't think you'd ever tell the difference. So I hope you enjoyed the little bit of work on this Taylor 314. You know, we did a couple of things, get it in good playing shape, and make sure it's going to last for a very, very long time. I should be ready to case this one back up and send it back to the person it belongs to. So thanks for watching, and I will see you later.